I hope you got the program. It's in the back. Has a schedule for today and tomorrow, as well as short bios on the speakers and the respondents. We have a very distinguished group with us today. Though one note, Suparna Chudhori from McGill will not be here today. She's a British national and her Canadian residency is expiring. And she could not get it reviewed in time. She referred to talking to Canadian immigration as talking to a brick wall. However, we have her paper, and it'll be read later by Leon Alsbaugh from Hedgehog Review, and Matt will respond and so on, so we'll proceed as though she was here. Unfortunately can't make it. Okay, the title of our symposium is Being Human in the Age of the Brain, Models of Mind and Their Social Effects. So it concerns being human, brain and models of mind, and then social effects. So what I thought by way of introduction, I would just talk about each of those briefly in turn. Our colloquium today is sponsored by the Picturing the Human colloquy here at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and is devoted to the study of emerging conceptualizations of human nature and personhood, the exploration of how they shape and are shaped by social life and practice, and then reflection on alternatives. What does it mean to be human? Well, we might regard this as just an abstract philosophical question, and I suppose it is that too. It is at the heart of how we imagine our life and order human affairs. Okay? It's not an abstract question at all. How we think about aging, as we explored 2 years ago, and how we think about algorithmic decision-making and governance, as we explored last year. The list could go on: how we raise our children, organize our schools, formulate our social policies, manage our work lives, treat those who commit crimes, determine who is mentally ill, and much more. The question of our nature bears very fundamentally on who we picture ourselves to be. And in recent years, new pictures have been put forward and grown to prominence that lay a heavy stress on our biology. And I want to focus on the picture here that suggests that we are our brains, that we are moving from soul to brain, as the subtitle of a book by a neuroscientist put it, and are now living in an emerging neuro-society, to quote another book by a neuroscientist. The mind is what the brain does, is a common neuroscience refrain, and the distinctly human qualities such as consciousness, intentionality, and the familiar features of our subjectivity, such as our emotions and our moral sense, are simply manifestations of more fundamental, natural, and law-like mechanisms and processes. We are in the midst of a biological revolution in this view that will is transforming human self-understanding. There's been an explosion of research with many books for general readers. A few popular titles, written mostly by scientists, convey the ambition, touching on topics that will be the subject of presentations here at our symposium. Making Up the Mind, How the Brain Creates Our Mental World. The Soul in the Brain, the Cerebral Basis of Language, Art, and Belief. Splendors and Miseries of the Brain, Love, Creativity, and the Quest for Human Happiness. Your Brain and Business, the Neuroscience of Great Leaders. Brain-Based Parenting, the Neuroscience of Caregiving for Healthy Attachment. Law and the Brain, Neurowisdom, the New Brain Science of Money, Happiness, and Success. And so on. And that's just a small sample from a mass literature. Okay? Another indication of this trend is the proliferation of the neuro prefix. It is now appended as an explanatory framework for studying features of human life that have been understood in other terms: social, psychological, philosophical, even spiritual. Examples include neurolaw, neuroeconomics, neuroeducation, neuromarketing, neurophilosophy, neuroethics, neuropsychiatry, neurotheology, neurofitness, neurowisdom, etc., etc. Again, the list can go on. Another indication is the sheer number of scientific fields that focus on aspects of our biology, particularly our brains, and propose that they will or will soon have answers to critical questions about what makes us think, feel, desire, and act as we do. These include evolutionary biology and psychology, neuroscience, behavioral genetics, cognitive science, applications of artificial intelligence, and so on. Further, new neurotechnologies have grown up in a feedback relationship with the neuro-understandings, especially drugs, but also devices and techniques, everything from Prozac to baby Mozart, to a whole industry of techniques to improve brain power. Perhaps some of us have been using these. Finally, social effects. It would be one thing if the claims for a disengaged and mechanistic picture of human being were merely research tools, pragmatically adapted for the sake of holding some aspects of human complexity constant so as to isolate and study others. But they are not. This picture, this mechanistic picture, is everywhere, and neurotechnologies are ubiquitous. Mechanistic pictures are certainly not the only answers that we have to the question of who we are, but all these new techniques and technologies, new understandings have an important shaping effect on the ways we think and feel and imagine ourselves. These social consequences need to be carefully explored, understood, and critiqued. According to Judith Butler, critique is protecting the public against harmful doctrines. All right, so that's one way to think about why we're having this symposium. There is trouble afoot. There are harmful doctrines afoot. Right? But critique in and of itself is not sufficient. We need a better foundation on which to build our science and the conduct of our affairs. We also hope to work toward articulating a more accurate and compelling picture of ourselves. All right? So our project isn't just a kind of critique, but also an effort to articulate a more compelling picture of ourselves. I want to begin this morning by exploring the popular uptake of neurobiological ideas, some called shorthand, sometimes called a chemical imbalance, for describing and acting on personal troubles. How do these ideas, which are followed on the widespread use of psychotropic medications, reach people, and what are their social effects? And that's the question I'm going to ask. While I'll not be offering a historical background for our proceedings, this is a fitting place to begin, because psychopharmacology, biological psychiatry, and the study of molecular malfunctions in neurotransmission have played a critical role in the rise of neuroscience and continue to contribute importantly to our emerging neuro society. Introduction. And I want to talk a little bit about neurobiology. My title is Neurobiology, Determinism, and Freedom. In the early 1960s, researchers administered all of the 62 patients at the Colorado Psychopathic Hospital at the University of Colorado, Denver a 100-item questionnaire exploring their attitudes toward psychiatrists, psychiatric illness, and hospitalization. The patients suffered from a wide range of problems, neuroses, psychoses, and character disorders, and stayed on average a total of 3 months. The researchers summarized the patients' views as follows. Quote, our patients tended to conceive mental illness in largely psychological terms. They saw it as concerned with feelings and emotions and disagreed that it was on a hereditary basis. And their view of treatment was, quote, essentially consistent with their psychologically minded conceptualization of mental illness. They viewed psychiatrists as working mainly with feelings and emotions, as requiring knowledge about their personal life in order to treat them, as aiming to teach them better ways of living, and as helping to find the emotional causes of their illnesses. This study was the first I could find that inquired into how people who receive mental health care explain their condition and their treatment. Over the years, a very limited number of further studies like it have been done. What they show is that as psychiatry moved in an increasingly biological and medication direction, lay explanation of treatment preferences changed as well. Among those who received mental health treatment, explanatory factors such as heredity and brain malfunction have grown in relative importance over time. A similar trend also appears in broad public surveys of views about mental disorders and help seeking. A comparison of findings from the 1996 General Social Survey of the U.S. public and the 2006 GSS, for instance, so over a 10-year period, showed a significant increase in the percentage of the public that endorsed chemical imbalance and genetic problems as possible causes of depression. The study also found an increase in public endorsement of medical treatment and the use of prescription medicine. To be sure, in all these studies, endorsements of psychosocial factors remain common, as do endorsements of psychotherapy. Ordinary people do not take what is sometimes called a hard medical model, in which, quote, all psychiatric illness is best explained solely in terms of molecular neuroscience. The public does not seem to take any such view. But the overarching trend has moved toward an ever stronger endorsement of biological causes of medication, especially among those who have personally dealt with mental health problems. Based on such studies and similar changes in the way mental health is characterized in the popular press, some researchers have suggested that a chemical imbalance explanation, particularly with respect to problems like depression, may be our dominant cultural story. Okay, so we started with it. People even have problems significant to be hospitalized, thinking in very psychological terms, to an increasingly biological view of sufferers. In recent years, the causal theory of chemical imbalance has been the subject of controversy. Popular books, magazines, and mental health blogs, critics have challenged both the efficacy of popular classes of drugs, especially the antidepressants of the SSRI class, like Prozac and so on, and theories of neurotransmitter deficiency. Some have charged that the public has been sold a bill of goods, led to believe in a misleading and harmful oversimplification of the complex causes of disorder. While psychopharmacology briefly entertained chemical imbalance theories in the past, these flawed ideas were subsequently refuted. Yet the myth lives on, according to these critics, perpetuated by the marketing juggernaut of Big Pharma and complicit psychiatrists who have led patients to believe that their diagnosed condition arises from a chemical imbalance that the prescribed medication sets forth. You might guess psychiatrists have been at pains to exonerate their field and emphasize new research directions. The field has moved beyond chemical balance ideas, according to an editorial in JAMA Psychiatry recently, and new research is expanding our understanding of depression across multiple levels of analysis, from circuits to neurotransmitters, to synaptic plasticity, to second messenger systems, to epigenetic and genetic differences. The old theory of chemical imbalance has been discarded, with new lines of biological research coming to replace it. Notice we're just moving from one biology to another biology. Still very biological conceptualization. But psychiatrists defending their field go further. They insist that they have never communicated to patients the simplistic idea that mental disorders are wholly caused by a chemical imbalance. According to psychiatrist Ronald Pies, a professor at Tufts University School of Medicine, former editor of Psychiatric Times, this idea is a myth and an urban legend, and he has never heard, quote, a knowledgeable, well-trained psychiatrist make such a preposterous claim. Granted, he notes, many psychiatrists did promote some version of a chemical imbalance theory. The biogenic amine hypothesis for mood disorders and a dopamine hypothesis for schizophrenia. And a class of drugs known as the SSRIs, a set of antidepressants, were accorded a rock star status as effective antidepressants that they did not deserve. But psychiatrists never claimed that a diagnosed condition was entirely due to a chemical imbalance that a medication. Let's pause. So might ask, just what have clinicians been telling people? In the absence of studies of doctor-patient communication on this subject, Pais draws on his more than 40 years of personal experience. Listening to hundreds of psychiatrists over the years, he insists that they have articulated to their patients is something like this. Quote, we believe depression may be caused by a combination of biochemical abnormalities in the brain, psychological factors, and environmental stresses. This antidepressant may help address the biological issues, while talk therapy can be helpful for the other issues. That's what Pais says the psychiatrists have been saying. Now, Pais accepts the idea that patients, ordinary people, have been misled, that they have accepted the simplistic imbalance theory of disorder and medication effect. His argument is psychiatry is not to blame. However, as the surveys I cited above indicate, there is no evidence that the lay public has adopted any such simplistic conception. Interviews I conducted with 80 people dealing with common mental health problems, the majority of whom had a diagnosis and a prescription, also speaks against the idea that the public endorses a purely biological. That's what's at stake here, is that kind of hard medical model. This is the purely biological view. All right, so what did people hear from their doctors? In order to understand, we have to consider the context of the communication. The doctor-patient encounter is not some sort of educational session for the conveying of abstract, experience-distant concepts. Nor do people get sent home with a psychiatry or neurobiology textbook. Rather, the doctor engages patients about very personal and painful experience in a practical effort to address a crisis and search for answers. It is in this emotionally laden, problem-solving and time-delimited context that psychiatrists speak and are heard. The following observation from a prominent psychiatrist provides a sense for why the talk of a chemical imbalance might even arise in the first place. He says, quote, when I find myself using phrases like chemical imbalance and serotonin deficiency, it is usually because I'm trying to convince a reluctant patient to take a medication. Using these words makes their illness seem more biological, taking some of the stigma away from having a mental illness. The implicit message I deliver in using such language is, your illness is biological, it is not your fault, and you are not going to be able to cure it by thinking it away. He admits that he falls into this way of talking to the patients all the time. Although chemical imbalance is a myth, he says, it is a convenient myth because it helps patients deflect responsibility for their condition and gives psychiatrists something to say when patients ask us questions about pathophysiology. In my interviews, many people spoke of their clinical experience in very similar terms. If their doctor brought up the issue of chemical imbalance or faulty wiring or some other, showed them pictures of scan pictures, the main reason they suggested was rhetorical. Resistant references to a minor brain problem were made in the context of efforts to persuade them either to begin a medication or stay on the one they were already taking. With an explanation in terms of brain malfunction, he said, the doctor sought to normalize the taking of a psychotropic medication by comparing their condition with the ordinary types of physical problems doctors routinely treat. Analogies such as taking insulin for diabetes were common. According to interviewees, introducing a chemical imbalance or other brain explanation was a way for the clinician to put an affirmative light on their situation, to convey a positive prognosis, to make clear that the problem is outside of their direct control, and to foster compliance with the medication regimen. Some patients found this persuasive, some did not. In many other cases, though, no such discussion took place. People often indicated that they came to the doctor visit already convinced they had a particular condition and needed medication. And this is very widespread. Most had also already come to see their struggles involving faulty genetics, neurochemistry, or wiring. No persuasion from the doctor was necessary. A discussion of their symptoms, diagnosis, and prescription proceeded without reference to underlying causes. Although a few believe their understanding would not necessarily be accepted by their physician, most seem to assume that physician affirmation of their ideas about diagnosis and prescription was an affirmation of their view of causation as well. The reason, I think, for this assumption concerned the way they already understood diagnostic categories. People frequently cited the fact of a formal diagnosis as conferring a reality and legitimacy on their suffering. In part, the very act of official naming had a power to impose a sense of order and objectivity on their anonymous experience and link it to a system of expert and recognized knowledge. The very fact of having a name creates a sense of order, right? That something is known. Right? But even more fundamentally, they understood the diagnosis to be making their problem real by giving it a physical status. Just like the psychiatrist quoted above, people contrasted real, objective problems with soft, subjective issues that are in your head, that you should be able to just talk about. Real in this dichotomy always seemed to mean physiological and to indicate medication as the appropriate intervention. Some interviewees, in fact, avoided seeking medical help or resisted the diagnosis, precisely because they worried that a doctor might think they have a real problem in this sense. The very reasons why doctors might introduce neurobiological ideas to patients, to make the problem more real, patient less responsible, and medication an appropriate and necessary response, makes the distinction between the real and the subjective almost inevitable. The ontological grounding, that sense of reality, and the moral assurance, not the fault, being offered shape the way that any talk of the other issues, psychological and circumstantial factors, is likely to be received. Contrary to what Pies and the psychiatrist refers to assume, there is no scientific knowledge of the common disorders like depression or anxiety disorders that would permit a sufferer's experience to be divided up into biological issues and other issues. His own multidimensional model of biopsychosocial, often professed in psychiatry, stresses that disorder causation and course involve a complex and little understood interaction of biological, psychological, and biological factors. The factors are not separate, nor are they separate both. Yet the very practice of the profession of psychiatry is now largely configured on this very separation. Over the past few decades, psychiatry has slowly withdrawn from the practice of psychotherapy. When psychiatrists do recognize the need for psychosocial interventions, they often farm this task out to others, therapists and social workers who are often of lower professional status. The practice even has a name, the split treatment. Psychiatry sessions that center on psychiatry sessions that focus on pharmacotherapy, med checks, and the system and symptom alleviation cannot help but carry an emphasis on biology. Any discussion of psychology and social circumstances being carried out elsewhere, if at all, and even if so, on a very short-term basis. Almost all psychotherapy in the U.S. is extremely short-term basis. A lot of it, 1 or 2 sessions per year. The other issues, lacking the prestigious ontology of science, surely appear ambiguous and insubstantial by comparison. Since the biology also provides the mechanism that reduces culpability, talk of the other issues might well be regarded as reintroducing the question of fault. Most of the people I interviewed who attributed their suffering primarily to neurobiological malfunctioning had but a very general sense for the sources of their understanding. Doctors were one source, but people also noted the influence of popular media, pharmaceutical advertising, and especially conversations with confidants, either family members or friends. People don't go to the doctor. Now, in the interest of time, I'll skip over popular media and the role of confidence. I can summarize these sources by saying that across studies of popular media and when interviewees shared about their experience with confidants, there was a common message. a message roughly equivalent to that of clinicians. In short, whatever else might be contributing to one's suffering and whatever else one might be doing about it, the biology is the factor that is real, redemptive, and the proper object of intervention. Proper in both the sense of necessary and in the sense of effective. It's what offers the positive prognosis. Most critical attention, however, has been focused on direct-to-consumer advertising. There are good reasons for this attention, including the simple fact that there is a strong correlation between such advertising and increased prescriptions, at least in the US, one of the only countries that permits it. Now, it's another question. All rates of this are going up in the countries that don't have direct-to-consumer advertising. So there's an interesting question about that. But the critics in the US have argued that DTC, direct-to-consumer, advertising is systematically misleading the public, conveying a message that is different from psychiatrists and out of step with their scientifically informed communications to patients. A brief consideration of such ads will show otherwise. Sorry, my nose is just... of contemporary DTC advertising appearing in print, television, and digital media, it is helpful to first consider pharmaceutical advertising in an earlier era, prior to the biologization of common mental health problems. For this purpose, I've chosen an ad for the drug Ciroc, oxazepam, a member of the family of drugs known as the benzodiazepines. The benzodiazepines, particularly Valium, were the most commonly prescribed psychotropic drugs throughout the 1960s and 1970s, and especially in brands now like Xanax, remain heavily used to this day. The Ciroc ad appeared, among other places, in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1967. It promoted the drug, you probably can't read it, but for anxiety, tension, agitation, irritability, and anxiety associated with depression. All right, so there you get a sense for the ad. You see the woman trapped behind in the bars formed by the mops and brooms, etc. Right, this is a bicycle back here. You can't see it very well. Right, indicating she's a mother. Right, and there she is at home, trapped by domestic responsibilities. Right, etc. Okay. She looks, as she knows, she looks directly at you. Right, the eyes. Again, hard to see here, but they kind of appear puffy and sad and maybe a little angry. It's hard to quite read the expression. Okay? Addressed to physicians, the text indicates that this is the sort of patient, quote, beset by the seemingly insurmountable problems of raising a young family and confined to the home most of the time. All right? This is the sort of patient that physicians see all the time. For months on end, she has been, quote, anxious, tense, irritable, and although the physician has offered reassurance and guidance, her symptoms, which reflect a sense of inadequacy and isolation, I'm quoting now from the text, have not remitted. Neither the drug nor the doctor can change her situation, but the drug can bring some relief, reducing her anxiety and agitation, and thereby strengthening her ability to cope. In time, quote, as she regains confidence and composure, the physician's counsel may be all the support she needs. Okay, so that's the text directed to the doctor. In this ad, the woman's anxiousness and feelings of inadequacy are depicted as perfectly understandable. Her daily suffering arises from her circumstances, and these circumstances are the real problem. While the ideal solution would be to change aspects of her environment, such change is outside the scope of the physician's therapeutic purview or responsibility. So, counseling, which might help with coping better, is indicated as the primary treatment. There is no after image here of the woman set free. There's no promise of cure or liberation. Rather, what is offered in the ad is the hope that after a while, the relief of her symptoms will help bolster her confidence and control. She can taper off the drug and live better with the demands of her situation. Okay? That was in the late 1960s. Between then and now, psychiatry underwent a fundamental change. After 1980, the sort of symptoms described in the Sirax ad will be framed exclusively within the new categories specified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The object of medication treatment, accordingly, will no longer be described in terms such as the seemingly unsurmountable problems of everyday life. The drugs will be prescribed for diagnosed disorders, something you have, something that involves a dysfunction within you. Between then and now, both the language and the ontological, right, the reality question, and moral presuppositions changed. These changed concepts and ideas inform pharmaceutical direct-to-consumer advertising, which began to explode after a relaxing of FDA rules in the late 1990s. Okay, so this is in a medical journal. There is no direct-to-consumer advertising in the 60s. It begins in the late 1990s. In DTC ads, the causes of conditions like depression and various forms of anxiety, at least until about 2010, are described in terms of a chemical imbalance which could be to blame. All right, that's a common phrase. Many even carried little dramatizations of neurons firing to illustrate how the drug corrects the imbalance. More recent ads lack the references to chemical imbalance because they now presuppose that the viewer already knows about the condition. Okay, a lot of the early ads for social anxiety disorder, general and depression, we're telling people what it is, all right? So you're trying to inform them that there's this thing out there that they might have, right? After about 2010, that kind of communication really stops. Now it presupposes you already know all about the conditions. The physical nature is signaled with such language as real or serious medical condition. The websites that are referenced in the ads, however, continue to present the imbalance idea. The current website for the antidepressant Pristiq, for example, explains that while no one knows for certain what causes it, experts believe that depression results when certain chemicals in the brain are out of balance. Okay, and then the drug corrects the imbalance. All right, the advertising campaign for Pristiq nicely illustrates the ontological and moral assumptions. Okay, so here's one of their ads. This one was from 2011. All right. The print ad campaign lasted from 2009 to at least 2016. All right, and they all carried some version of the headline, "Does depression hold you back from enjoying your life?" Or, as in this one, "From what you enjoy." They depict a depression sufferer as a wind-up doll. Okay, here's the sufferer here. All right. Who's hunched forward. The stiff arms indicate that her spring has wound down. All right. The idea, according to the company, is to capture the feeling of depression. The doll simulates the feeling of being sad, helpless, overwhelmed, and uninterested in your favorite activities. I'm quoting now from the ad. You may feel, continues the ad copy, like you have to wind yourself up. In the ads, the doll, woman, right, is looking longingly at a large mirror which does not reflect back her current condition, but an after-treatment image. Okay, so she's looking at an image in the mirror that will do it. Let me give you, here's another one. This one is from 2016. Right. So here you see the sufferer, and then you see her back, right, after. The drug is the turning point, right? Most of the ads are organized in that fashion. There's a before and after image. Here's what life is like before. Here's what life is like after. Okay, so you can see her there, right? She's back, active, etc. Okay. Now, as you all have noticed, the Pristiq ad is very different from the Sirax ad. Here, there are no reasons for the bad feelings. The sufferer is shown outside of any context, is an isolated and troubled figure. She makes no eye contact. Rather, she, the doll, right, is an object of our gaze. There is no understandable human predicament here that we might recognize. The ad invites us to identify with an impairment, and with an explanation in terms of a medical condition that robs a person of their agency, preventing the enjoyment of life, and even perhaps causing the neglect of others. You see, here she's alone. There, she's back with husband and daughter. Okay? Counseling is not mentioned, though it sometimes is on the drug websites, nor any indication given of how long the drug might be required. The after image in the mirror represents the promise of a positive outcome. There is nothing going on that the medication, taken continuously, cannot correct. A better life awaits. Okay? So here you do have a promise of a better life. The message of chemical imbalance in such advertising overlaps with the popular media, and it follows the same script as the doctors. There is a similar ontological claim. Though no one knows for certain what causes diagnosable conditions, they, just like other medical problems, involve the physical body and cannot be thought away. There is a similar moral claim. The sufferer of the condition is not responsible for or to blame because a dysfunctional mechanism is at work in them. There is a similar reason for making these claims, namely to encourage people to recognize that a richer, less inhibited life is available and to embrace the positive role that medication may necessarily play in bringing that about. And with respect to these claims, the value of other interventions is not so much explicitly denied as effectively rendered marginal, subsidiary, optional. Okay? In my interviewed study, this message is precisely what chemical imbalance meant to people. The common message received from these sources, I found, shapes how people take up neurobiological language and pharmaceuticals as social objects or narratives to make sense of and alter the trajectory of their experience. I've already referenced their ideas about the reality of diagnosable conditions. People in the interviews commonly drew a contrast between the real somatic problems, which have medical names, and the other problems that you can just talk out. This objective-subjective distinction in turn mapped onto the views of treatment. Dealing with the real problems was a question of medication, and people generally had a positive view of drug efficacy. For the problems you can just talk out, they saw value in psychotherapy if one was so inclined, but generally had low expectations of it. This anemic, though not typically negative view, was shared by most of those who had actually been in therapy, had gone to psychotherapy, and a lot of the people I interviewed had. The reception of the moral claims, however, had a twist. Although offered for a moral reason, to relieve patients of self-blame, the actual import of this claim lay elsewhere. People did not, in fact, blame themselves for their predicaments. As community surveys have consistently found, moral failings and limited willpower, to use the Surgeon General's language, are the least endorsed causes that people give for conditions like depression. Interviewees were dealing with such issues as shyness and anxiety in social situations, underperformance at work or school, struggles after a loss of significant relationships, and disappointment with how their life was unfolding. They strongly desired to meet the standards of outgoingness, high performance, and emotional efficiency, and felt personally deficient, not guilty, for falling short. Okay? This wasn't something they had any sense in which they were intentionally violating the norm. Okay? They did not express guilt for it. What the chemical imbalance, that external mechanism that removes responsibility, meant was that their suffering was brought on by a force external to and apart from their self, from their volition and intentions. This would seem to mean that their thoughts, emotions, or behavior were externally determined, that they lack control in an important area of their life. It would seem to mean that the benign offer of medical absolution comes with a high price. This trade-off is succinctly expressed by a man diagnosed with depression who was interviewed by the sociologist David Karp. The guy says, "The good news is that it's biogenic, and therefore it's not my fault. The bad news is that it's biogenic, because I'm just a passenger on life's way and have no idea of who's driving me where and to what destination." But the people we interviewed did not see themselves as determined, as without free will or effective agency, or disordered or different in any significant way. They just had a little neural glitch. In support of this view, they often referenced others, including their physician, as stressing how common their condition was, how ordinary, how millions of people have it. None could say much about the neurobiological problem, and none really tried. In their stories, I think it is fair to say, the specifics of a putative brain science mattered little. Rather than indicating a biological determinism, people saw the neuro explanation as detaching painful experience and limitations from their life concerns and context and locating this experience elsewhere in a faulty biological mechanism. The mechanism served as a kind of container for the non-self, for those thoughts and feelings and actions now seen as alien and non-reflective of them. It opened up a new way to imagine the effects of medication as confirming the faulty mechanism and providing hope for its overcoming. It offered people, paradoxically, a way to envision themselves, with the aid of medication, as unencumbered by their past and self-determining of their future. It offered, in short, to reveal a more ideal self. For many, to paraphrase a DTC ad, it was the explanation they had been looking for. All right, lastly, is this kind of loose talk of neurobiology a problem? Right? By now you might just say, well, what's the problem? So I want to just briefly comment on that at the end. Toward the end of Mind Fixers, a history of psychiatry's troubled search for the biology of mental illness, the historian Anne Harrington poses the following question. She begins, "A century ago, some of those who suffered mentally were not really sick, received fictive diagnoses from their doctors, like bad nerves or neurasthenia. By the early 20th century, most of the doctors who treated such patients knew there was nothing literally wrong with their nerves. The patients may or may not have known, or they may or may not have cared. They may not have cared because the labeling process, when it worked well, was a way of acknowledging the gravity of their suffering. It provided a coherent explanation for real symptoms. Similarly today," she writes, "patients present with acute mental or emotional distress, and doctors look for a DSM diagnosis that will make sense of their suffering and prescribe drugs. By acting this way, general practitioners and psychiatrists perpetuate the fiction that the drugs they are prescribing are correcting biochemical deficiencies caused by disease, much as, say, a prescription of insulin corrects a biochemical deficiency caused by diabetes." And then her question is this wrong? Now, apart from the issue of misplaced hopes in the power of medication, I want to answer by considering what the neurobiological imagining of problem causation closes off. Without understanding so themselves, the people I interviewed were in profound ways abandoning the very sources of their individual agency, sources that are bound up with their personal and social histories, and most crucially, the meanings they might draw from their uniquely individual experience. And this reductive understanding of their selfhood, I believe, has pernicious consequences. List a few. Splitting off experience leaves people with neither a reason nor a means to seek a fuller picture of their circumstances, of who they are, what moves them, and critically, by what standards they seek to live. Talk of a chemical imbalance is a black hole. In its terms, the distresses and struggles of life are put beyond understanding. They're flattened out, homogenized in diagnostic language, and rendered illegible. Okay? Every bad feeling becomes depression. Every bad feeling is anxiety, and so on. Right? It just becomes this flat vocabulary that indicates nothing. Consequently, the means by which people might come to grips with their predicament, such as exploring their history, reflecting on the meaning of their emotions, or assessing their social circumstances, are undone. In addition to undermining personal reflection, reference to neurobiology as the root of problems and possible solutions undermines the point of interpersonal dialogue, whether with friends or family, a counselor or therapist. At best, confidence could recommend or confirm the need for expert help and affirm the patient in complying with it. But once embarked on this course, it verified per patient that their suffering was in fact a private burden, a somatic dysfunction in them for which others' advice and responsibility to care must necessarily be limited. Friends and family, knowing of their treatment, also appeared to offer them less leeway, quick to associate any change in behavior or mood to their medication. All right, which people often found offensive. They would say something, say, "Are you off your meds?" All right. Further, the neurobiological explanation naturalized the social standards against which people compared themselves. The people I interviewed implicitly judged themselves against social norms of contractual relationship, emotional control, and self-sufficiency. They were inadequately optimizing of their potential, couldn't shake off losses quickly enough or efficiently control their emotions, worried what others thought of them, had an inadequately outgoing personality, and the like. A sense of deficiency was pervasive. Yet, in attributing these struggles to rogue chemicals, they are implicitly treating the standard of comparison not, in fact, to social norms, such as the imperative that we be effusive and extroverted, but to physiological norms. Like the glucose metabolism dysfunction in a diabetic, failure to be extroverted is a discrepancy from the natural yardstick of health. Okay? Everyone is naturally extroverted, okay? And so if you're not, you have the biochemical deficiency, right? Like how much blood glucose one should have. This naturalizing left no grounds in which to resist the social standards themselves or entertain different conceptions of the good. You don't resist a biological dysfunction, you try to put it right. Finally, the language of chemical imbalance deprived people's struggles of any meaning and therefore of any value. They could find little significance or purpose in their experience and even less worth in those aspects of themselves at odds with the dominant social standards. Nothing in this way of imagining struggles has any possible resonance with those rich and deep philosophical, religious, and literary traditions from Sophocles to Dostoevsky to Edith Stein that see in suffering a road to gaining self-understanding and to apprehend important truths about the human condition. From thinking of ourselves as broken mechanisms, we must conclude that there is little to be learned. All right, thank you.